Welcome to the Pursuit Zone Adventure Travel Podcast. I am your host, Paul Schmid, and I interview modern-day explorers from around the globe to bring you their exciting stories. These are people that dream big, break out of their comfort zones, and take on ambitious pursuits. This is episode 151 with Ralph Karsten. I met Ralph at Midwest Mountaineering where he was giving a presentation on bikepacking, and I invited him to be a guest on the show. But before we get to that, if you want to give me some feedback, you can send me an email at paul@thepursuitzone.com or leave me a voice message at speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. And now, let me introduce my guest. June 2018 will be the second time Ralph Karsten starts the Tour Divide at the Grand Depart in Banff, Canada. The Tour Divide is an annual self-supported mountain bike race that follows the nearly 2,700-mile Great Divide mountain bike route from Canada to the Mexican border. Ralph also enjoys primitive camping, practicing survival skills, and flying hang gliders. Ralph Karsten, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Well, thank you.
Ralph, what inspired you to want to ride the Tour Divide?
I think for me it was something that's common to a lot of people that have been on it. They happen to encounter a movie called Ride the Divide. And I saw that movie. Actually, I had to get the DVD. There was no other way I knew of at the time to obtain it. But it just looked like such a fascinating concept. So I ordered it up. I got it. I watched it. I showed it to some friends of mine. Then I watched it a few more times. You could tell it was getting into my consciousness. And I remember announcing to a friend of mine that I think I'm going to try to do this. And he just looked at me and said, you're nuts. But I just did it anyway.
Was that what got you into bikepacking, or were you into it before that?
I've been into bicycles for a long time. When I found out about the movie Ride the Divide, I was going over the Lake Pepin 3-Speed Tour website, and I found a link to it. The Lake Pepin 3-Speed Tour is, you show up in Red Wing, you have a British 3-Speed, you've got whatever you need on it so that you can ride the whole day to go from Red Wing to Wabasha, and then the next day you come back. It's a 2-day event, occurs in May, and people show up from all over the country with their old British 3-Speeds to ride on this thing. And I'd done it before, and it was one of the most fun I had ever had on a bicycle, despite the fact that, I've got all kinds of bikes. I saw this movie, and I just thought I had to do it. When I got to Banff, it was not only the first time I'd been on the Tour Divide. It was the first time I'd been to Banff. It had been the first time I'd really been to Canada. I had never gone overnight on a bicycle on any kind of touring before. That was my first exposure to any kind of touring or bike packing or anything. The longest I'd ridden before that was 100 kilometers.
What did you think of Banff when you got there?
Oh, it's fabulous. Absolutely scenic. I took a bus ride in from the Calgary airport, and the mountains are spectacular. As soon as you start to see them, I was literally clawing at the glass of the bus because you just want to swallow these things. It's such a spectacular place. It's hard to believe that mountains like that are even real, but that's what they are. And so I get into Banff, and you're just walking down the street. You hear 10 different languages. Anytime, it's got to be just super busy because it's such an amazing piece of scenery. And this mountain town is just nestled right in the midst of it. So I enjoyed it immensely, although I wasn't there very long.
The other day, I heard somebody talk about bike packing as if it's the new way of referring to any type of bike travel that has bags. But yet, I sometimes myself think of like the traditional bike touring as being separate from bike packing. How do you define bike packing?
I'm going to say it actually is. And here's how it's different. When you're touring on a bicycle, chances are you are going to spend a lot of time on pavement. There's hotels, there's towns you're going to, stuff like that. Bike packing is a little different in the regard that I'm going to draw the line that you're probably on a mountain bike, or you're on a bike that's you are expecting to be riding into literally the middle of nowhere where there may not be another person for 50 or 100 miles. You're going to be on dirt roads. You're going to be on single track. You're going to be on paths that are unrideable, that you're simply going to have to push this thing. So you have to bring with you what you need, just like you would if you were bike touring, what you need to survive on the road, that sort of thing. The difference being that you are in the middle of nowhere, so you really are dependent entirely on yourself. And if you just have to expect that that's how it's going to be. And your bicycle, really, if you're going to be successful with this, it needs to have the ability to ride on the surfaces that are going to be common on such a trip. So that's how I define it, as being different from just regular bicycle touring, where, you might see some dirt roads, but you're going to spend a lot of time on pavement. I mean, you might go for days without seeing a car if you're bike packing.
What do you do to prepare for a race like the Tour Divide? I mean, first of all, what would you do for training?
I'm probably a terrible person to ask, but in my opinion, you'd better be comfortable with being able to ride 100 miles in a day, and then be able to get up the next day and do it again. Not so much because if you're going to be racing on the Tour Divide, if you're going to be competitive, you probably have to ride more than 100 miles. And it's pretty doable, because that time of year, the days are pretty long. Like in Banff, it doesn't get dark until it's not even dark at 10 p.m. There's nothing else to do. Might as well go for a bike ride. And, well, that's the sort of thing you might be doing for 12 to 14 hours. Some people ride as much as 19 or 20 hours a day, and they sleep for 4 hours. To me, that's a bit radical, because I've seen from other racers what happens when you get sleep deprived. And I don't want to fall over in the middle of nowhere and be a medical risk to myself. So I'm probably not that competitive, but it's realistic that you could go 130, 140 miles a day. And if you do that, you're probably in the ballpark. The guy that set the record on the Tour Divide was riding on average about 193 miles a day. And that's on a bike it's a mountain bike that was packed up with stuff and probably weighing 45 to 50 pounds.
Right. So you're not going out there trying to win this race. You're just going out there to have a good time and to see how far you can get, right?
For me, yeah. I'm 62. I enjoy bikes. There's a guy named Christopher McDougall who wrote a book, Born to Run, that has a lot to say about humans' abilities to run and what our capacity to run is as we get into older age, which is to say quite a bit. I don't see any reason why I shouldn't be able to ride long distances, and there's a certain fascination with it. So for me, I don't expect to win against guys that are in their 20s and 30s, but I certainly want to experience what this is about, and if I can complete this and make it happen for me, it's I would say it's about goal setting.
Yeah, I've read that book, Born to Run. That's a pretty good book. I think I know that what the part that you're talking about. He says that it's something, I'm going to paraphrase it. It's like when you hit your prime ability as a runner, as a male runner, you maintain that ability. You have the ability to maintain that ability to your like 60 some years old, and you could outrun a 19-year-old.
Very possibly. I think how I put it, and this is on average, you can run a certain speed when you're 18. If you stay in good condition and continue running, you'll reach your peak some decades after that. And if you keep it up, you won't fall back to the point of where you were when you were 18 until you're 64.
Yeah. It's
I mean,
amazing.
that's astonishing to me when I first read it. But when you look at what people do, and especially when he talks about how he found people that actually were capable of running down an antelope, just keeping that antelope moving until it literally fell over. That's when you realize, this stuff is possible.
I noticed that when I was preparing for this interview, I Googled your name and it took me to a page that had a whole bunch of pictures of different bike rigs for the race. And I noticed there are quite a lot of people that ride this race that are over 40 years old. Did you notice that when you were at Banff, a lot of older riders?
Yes, I would say when you get to Banff, man, there were a lot of people. I was surprised to see how many people were my age or older. I thought I was going to be one of the oldest people there, and it's like, forget it, nonsense. That's ridiculous. There's one guy that was a coach for a mountain bike team, and he was retired. He had coached for a high school, and decided he was going to ride himself the Tour Divide. So he shows up. He's 67 years old, and his mountain bike is a single speed. I thought, okay, I'm going to need gears to do this because there's, 200,000 feet of climbing and stuff like that. Some pretty serious stuff going on. And here he is with a single speed. And I asked him, how in the heck do you pull this off? And he goes, well, you got two speeds. When you're sitting, you're spinning, or you're standing up and making the bike go forward by standing up. It's like having a couple gears lower. And well, that's true. And he said, how fast are you going in your lowest gear? And I said, well, about 3 miles an hour. And he's like, that's about how fast you're going when you're pushing the bike. So I couldn't argue with the logic. There's some problems where you can't really spin out effectively on a single speed when you're descending. So there's only so fast you can go. So people riding single speeds kind of tend to set their own records about that. But he was 67. Man, it was awesome to see. It was pretty cool. And I felt like half the crowd that was out there was easily 45 or older.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree based on the data I was seeing online. So how exactly do you get your bike to Banff? Tell me about that process.
Well, I feel like if I'm going to describe that, it's about getting the bike ready to bike pack in general. You, of course, start with a mountain bike. For the Tour Divide or any long bike packing expedition, generally the 29ers are preferred, something hardtail, because you're in the middle of nowhere. It's got to be reliable. And that's just how it is. The more stuff you've got that can break, the more stuff you're going to have breaking on the Tour Divide. It has a way of breaking stuff. Anyway, you figure out how you can get all your stuff on the bike with the various different packs, and it's amazing the explosion I've been seeing in the various packs and companies that make all the various different types of packs that there are these days. But once you've got all that figured out, the process is to get it to Banff. Well, for me, I'm going on the plane. You get a bike box, maybe from a bicycle shop, and it should be one big enough that can hold a mountain bike in it. You're going to wind up taking the wheels off. You're going to take the pedals off of the bike. You're probably going to lower the seat, take the handlebars off, or at least turn them sideways. And then I would think that you would use all the bike packing items as part of the padding. If you've got a derailleur on the bike, I prefer not to have derailleurs, but if you've got one, you do definitely want to remove that. So if someone hits the side, it doesn't get smashed. And probably not a bad idea to wrap something around the chain wheel so that doesn't get bent. And probably also a good idea to do the same for the disc rotors on the wheels. If you do all that stuff and you're careful with it, I packed and unpacked my bike about 5 or 6 times before I was really satisfied that it was in the box properly. I taped it all up. When I got to the airport, the first time I did this, I just got the bike out of the car. I handed it off to the Skycap because I was flying Delta. Delta charges about $150 for something like a bicycle. And amazingly enough, the first time I went there, 7 minutes later, I was through TSA. When I got to Calgary, I had 25 or 45 minutes to get to the bus, get through customs, get through the bus with my bike, and I did it in 25 minutes. So it went like clockwork. But that's how you do it. You just pack it up and you really work at it to make sure that when you pack it up, if someone just knocks the box over or something like that, it's not going to mess the bike up. So kind of common sense stuff. But when the bikes are shipped normally to a bike shop, there are these little plastic pieces that wind up being in the dropouts in the rear and also the front fork. You want to get a set of those so that if something hits that, you don't wind up with a bent fork or something.
So there was plenty of room on the shuttle bus for your bike?
Oh yeah. There were several Tour Divide riders on the bus that I took to Banff.
Do you remember what you did? Did you take like that Banff Airporter, I think it's called?
Yeah. Actually, that's one of them. I think there's about 5 or 6 different services that you can get to Banff, but the Banff Airporter is the one that I hear about the most.
Tell me a little bit more about your bike. What is it, and how do you have it set up in terms of bags and whatnot?
Well, this year I'm riding a Jones Plus. Jones is a really kind of very interesting bike company in Oregon, owned by a guy named Jeff Jones. You call there, you're probably going to wind up talking to him. His bikes don't have suspension on them. A lot of people riding on the Tour Divide don't even have front suspension, simply because it's unreliable. In this case, the plus refers to the fact that this bike is running 29 plus tires, which are enormous. And you're getting your suspension from the tires. When I've been riding it, in practice rides around here in the Twin Cities, I've only been running about 14 or 15 pounds in them. So it's pretty soft ride, kind of like you would on a fat bike, but not quite as fat a tire. That's why they're called plus instead of fat. I guess they're being political. But anyway, it has a very relaxed geometry, not unlike an old British 3-speed. And the front fork is what's called a truss fork, like you used to see on old American heavyweight balloon tire bikes, maybe pre-war or maybe just after the war. But no suspension. So he did it that way to get the fork as light and as stiff as possible, just to improve the handling. He wants this thing to be pretty quick, but at the same time, it's got a very long wheelbase, so it's a fairly smooth ride. It has a lot of room in the triangle just front of the seat tube. So I've got what's called a frame bag that fills that triangle. That's got 3 compartments in it. One is fairly flat. You can put maps and stuff in it. The other is runs the length of the top tube and about halfway down. And that I've got my medical kit, my tool kit, the water pumping stuff, a few other sundries, spare batteries, and oddball things like that. And then the final triangle down at the bottom of this frame bag towards the bottom bracket, I'm carrying... looks like I'm going to be carrying most of my food, possibly some water in there, and a few clothing items. Off the handlebars, I'm hanging what's called a handlebar roll, and it's basically a bag that you put in stuff from the left or right, and it just is strapped to the handlebars. So I'm going to be carrying some weight in the front. The idea behind a handlebar roll is that you do have weight in the front as well as weight in the rear, so you're trying to balance out the load a bit. I have tried to put all the weight in the front forks down low. You definitely feel that in terms of handling, and it turns out that kind of packing is a fair amount of drag, which is a bigger deal than the weight is. So the handlebar pack kind of sits in snug, and it's not a whole lot wider than I am. So the idea is hopefully you're not creating any more drag by having it there. And finally, I've got a seat bag that just hangs off of the seat post, and also the rails of the seat itself kind of points up behind me. And I'm carrying my sleeping bag and not a whole lot else in that. So I'm trying to make that all fit. I've done with a rack in the past with some small pannier bags, but if you're hiking the bike, the pannier bags tend to get in the way. So I'm trying to see if I can reduce the drag and weight by getting rid of the rack. So I'm still experimenting with it. I think hopefully I'll be done. I'll have this figured out in another couple of months. But you keep trying new ideas and seeing what works and what doesn't, and then riding the bike and see if you feel comfortable with it. And in my case, the Jones being a steel frame, and I've got a 14-speed roll-off on the back. It's a fairly heavy bike. It's probably weighing about 32 pounds. So I'm really wanting to keep this thing under 50 pounds. So we'll see how it goes.
Did you call Mr. Jones before you got the bike?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had a few conversations with him because I just got curious about it. I encountered a Jones on the Tour Divide, and it was just such a curious looking machine. I had to check it out. I looked at some videos online and really kind of fascinating concepts. One of them that really intrigued me was the idea that a wider tire is actually faster because the pancake that you're putting on the riding surface is it's wider, but it's not as long, and you have a softer ride, potentially softer and potentially faster, a lot depending upon what kind of surface you're actually on. So I was interested in that idea. I was also interested in the more upright riding position that the Jones has because, I tried drop bars for long distances, and after a while, I can't manage it. I have too much trouble. I've always had trouble with my wrists, even when I was in my teens, and that's not any better now. So the drop bars, that's good for a day, but a week, 2 weeks, you've got to be pretty seriously dedicated to keep running drop bars that long.
You were mentioning something about Sherpas Neck, which I had never heard before. Can you tell us about that?
Sherpas Neck is a situation where you can have so much fatigue in your neck that the muscles literally shut down and you are unable to hold your head up. And it's not like it's something that you can ride into. It's something that as you ride, the more and more you get, the more and more Sherpas Neck is on the horizon. This is something that after I saw Tour Divide, or movie, the Ride the Divide, there's another movie those guys made called Inspired to Ride. And that was a documentary about the cross-country transcontinental U.S. race. And when I started reading about that sort of stuff online, that's when I started finding out about Sherpas Neck and the fact that some people use bungees attached to their helmets and such to help hold up their neck so it doesn't give them so much effort. Well, that's something that you're going to experience if you have dropped handlebars. And I didn't experience it, but boy, did my neck muscles get sore on the last, when I've been on the Tour Divide. It just got to be the point where that was one of the painful things that I was dealing with every day, was just how much my neck hurt and how much my wrists hurt. So, getting the more upright position of the Jones is, I'm really looking forward to it.
I have those handlebars. I think it's called the Loop HBar on my fat tire
the Jones
bike.
bars.
Yeah. I've got the aluminum version with the ergon grips, I think they're called. Just those little grips that have a little bit of a wider section for your palm to rest on. Yeah,
pretty sweet.
Yeah, that's a pretty nice setup. So how did you kind of decide did you have the conversation about what size you needed when you were talking to Mr. Jones?
A little bit, yeah. I knew I needed a not the biggest frame ever, but one of the bigger frames. I guess that came up a little bit, but it wasn't a big focus in the conversation.
I was just curious, kind of how you decide if you're, in a case like this, you're probably not able to try it out at a store. You have to kind of decide and then just go with it.
Okay, that's a whole different topic there. I had a Salsa Cut Throat. The Cutthroat was designed by Salsa, apparently for the Tour Divide. That's how they market it. It even has a map of the tour divide on its on the down tube, and it's actually pretty well set up. But if you're actually going to take it on the tour divide, there's some things you want to do. But I had one of those. I had ridden that on the tour divide and around town and stuff. It's got the wood chipper bars, which are a dropped handlebar. And initially, they seem great. But boy, oh boy, when you get fatigued, dealing with drops, that's where I really realized on the Tour divide that other people might be able to do it, but I can't. I can't handle it. So that was part of the reason why I became interested in not just the Jones bar, but in the whole Jones bicycle concept. He's an outlier. There's no question about that. Whether he is leading the pack is hard to say, but he was the first one to have the longer chain stays in the rear, putting the rear wheel a lot further from the seat tube. And it's interesting to see that other manufacturers are starting to copy that now. So they're not making their bikes look exactly like it, but if you I've seen several bikes where that's starting to show up, and you did not see that in mountain bikes even 6 years ago. That just wasn't out there. So I think he's kind of bucking the industry, and I think in a good way. So I'm going to find out how it works for me.
What are you doing for pedals and for shoes?
I've got a set of Shimano pedals. They're platform pedals. They're pretty nice. They've been holding up pretty well. I've moved them from bike to bike. I've also got a set of Shimano pedals that are platform on one side and clipless on the other. And so I've been experimenting with clipless footwear. I've got some clipless sandals and clipless mountain bike shoes. But for the most part, I just ride with hiking shoes on the platforms, because the thing is, if you're in the middle of nowhere and you're climbing, you might wind up in a situation where if you've got a lot of exhaustion, that if something happens, you got to get your foot off the pedal right now. With a platform pedal, it's just going to happen. You're going to get your foot off and down where you need it so you don't fall over. But with clipless, it just seemed like a risk that I didn't feel like taking. A lot of people ride clipless. I can see advantages because for one thing, you can pull up. But the thing is, if you're hiking, you really need the sole of your shoe to move a little bit if you're going to be comfortable. And if you're hiking in the middle of nowhere. There's rocks and dirt and stuff, and so the clips on the bottom of your clipless shoes are going to get worn out by that. So I don't know. I really felt like the hiking shoes was the way to go for me. I feel like it needs to be a fairly stiff sole, and that goes against my wilderness survival training. But we are on a bike ride here, so I'll take that bit of compromise.
Let's talk a little bit about some of your kit. I'm curious about, first of all, you can talk about your shelter. What are you doing? Maybe your shelter and your sleep system.
A lot of guys use a bivy bag. That's basically a waterproof bag that goes over your sleeping bag. So they're basically sleeping out in the open. There's bears, mountain lions, stuff like that. Probably that the very thin nature of a tent isn't going to make a whole lot of difference. But I wanted to have a tent. With a tent, there's a space in there that I can bring stuff inside, maybe things that I want to keep dry in case it starts raining during the night. So I've got a ZPacks tent. That's ZPacks. It's called a Hexamid, ZPacks Hexamid. And it can kind of sort of sleep two people. It's got exactly one pole in it. So there's an entrance on one side and just basically guy lines that hold the back side of the tent away from the support pole, which is made of carbon fiber. kind of unusual design in that the sides of the tent, where they get down to the bottom, that's where the mosquito netting is, and the mosquito netting is also the floor. The idea is that if water drips off of this thing, it doesn't pool inside the tent. It can go through the mosquito netting. So on top of that, you put sort of a bathtub, which is the ground tarp of the tent, but it's on the inside of the tent rather than on the outside. And in my case, that ground tarp is also designed to be a waterproof and windproof poncho. So that's the tent. My sleeping bag is a 10-degree down-filled bag that I don't even know the brand. I picked it up at REI, but it stuffs pretty well, so I can get it into a variety of my bags. So that's my sleeping arrangement. I just pile up clothes and stuff for my pillow. So I not exactly roughing it, but kind of rough.
I know from when I heard you give your presentation that you're big into merino wool. Can you kind of tell us, how your clothing system evolved and why you're a big proponent of merino?
Well, I don't like this stink. And with just about, I'm sorry, you get older, you want life to be a little bit better, and but I've tried merino wool for smart wool socks for ages, and my feet are just more comfortable in them. Then I got a merino wool jersey a few years ago, and I just found it a lot easier to wear and use than a regular bicycle jersey. So it also works really well if you've got a smart wool shirt with long sleeves. So I picked one of those up, and that's all I wear underneath my jacket if I'm dealing with cold and stuff. And so far, it's been pretty effective. The coldest I have encountered has been in the mid 30s on the Tour Divide, with strong winds and a fair amount of moisture, and I've stayed warm with that. I also carry a smart wool long underwear, and I'm undecided at this point whether I'm going to bring chamois shorts or not. Whether I'm just going to dispense with the Lycra entirely on this trip. I think a lot depends on the saddle. Right now, that's a big deal with me because I found my biggest limitation every time I've been on long bikepacking trips has been saddle sores. And so making sure I avoid that is probably my number one priority at this point, since the smart wool has proven that it can keep me warm and cool as required. That's what I love about the wool, is it seems to work in your favor whether you need to be warm or cool.
Talk about bear spray.
Okay, you bring bear spray. That's what you do. There's this guy, I forget his name, but he's got an 1.5-hour long talk on YouTube about bears. He's a bear expert. But what it boils down to is that if you're going into bear country, you've got bear spray. There's not, oh, well, what if you're in bear country and you don't have bear spray? It isn't like that. If you're in bear country, you have bear spray. Otherwise, you are in a really serious survival situation. I'm going on a bike packing trip here. Okay. My deal isn't all about just surviving against the odds. I'm on a bike packing trip, so I've got the bear spray with me. You can't carry that on the plane, so you got to pick it up in Banff. That's the deal. Generally speaking, dealing with bears is you never approach a bear. If the bear approaches you, you make sure you get the bear spray out and arm it and be ready. Frequently, they'll do a bluff charge but you have to stand your ground. You never, ever run from a bear. If he decides, okay, after the bluff charge, that this time he's going to charge you for real, you let him have it. And my feeling about it is, even if they're doing a bluff charge, they're probably going to get it if he gets anywhere within 12 feet. They go at 35 miles an hour if they're running hard, so you can't outride them. There's a YouTube video of somebody riding his mountain bike and there's apparently a bear chasing him. That video is a hoax. It didn't happen that way, because if a bear was really chasing him on a mountain bike, it would have caught him. You don't run or try to ride from a bear. You have to stand your ground. And that's why it's really, really important that you have bear spray and not a knife and not a gun, because you're probably going to wind up being dead if it comes down to that. With the bear spray is your best chance of avoiding the bear. So the bells help, but they only help if you're visually around. If the bear hears the bell, it doesn't mean anything to him otherwise. If you're hiking, the bells are good. But if you're riding on a bicycle and you're moving at a faster speed, the bell isn't going to give you enough warning. So that's a tricky bit. You really have to be up on your awareness and be watching what's ahead of you and be ready to stop.
What have you seen out there for wildlife? Have you seen any bears or any mountain lions?
No mountain lions, but I have seen some bears, and they were both grizzlies, and they both ran as soon as they realized I was there. They literally bolted. In both cases, I was wearing my rain poncho, which is kind of gray and mottled, so I probably looked enormous, and looking enormous is something that a bear respects, apparently.
What other kind of safety type equipment do you have? I guess specifically I'm curious about if you're carrying any type of a GPS or like a satellite type tracking device.
Yeah. Actually, I have a GPS that has my route on it using a GPX file. It's a Garmin. It's designed for bicycle work. So a lot of people use the eTrex 30, which really isn't, but you can load the GPX files on that, and they're easy to use. And you can mount them on a bike easy enough. So that's a real common GPS to be used on a trip like this. In addition to that, I have something called a spot locator. A spot locator runs off of 4 AAA batteries that are lithium ion. And I haven't figured out how long they last, but they will go for 2 weeks with that thing on 14 hours a day. And basically with the spot locator, it communicates with a geostationary satellite, which in turn communicates my position to a website. And the website is known as the track leader page. And it basically is, I give the URL of that to my friends when I go on the trip so they can watch where I am. And it shows the route that I'm on, and shows where I am on that route, and shows actually where everybody else is on that route as well. So it's kind of fun. Even in the middle of nowhere, the eye in the sky is watching you. There's a different version made by a company called Delorme, and I think Garmin bought them out. But Delorme had a version of it that you could send text messages back and forth via the geostationary satellites. So, but I haven't used that one so far. It seems like it's a larger unit. I haven't figured out how to mount it, and its battery consumption is considerably higher. And I would also say that the texting feature is not particularly easy to use. So I'm just going to stick with the spot locator. It's very reliable and very, very proven. They've been doing that for a very long time.
What happens before the start of the Tour Divide? Any type of meetings, or do they do any gear checks?
Oh, goodness sakes. The Tour Divide it's not an official race. There's no support of any kind whatsoever. It's word of mouth about how everything happens. There's no pre-race meetings. There's no staging. There's no support anywhere along the route. You're entirely 100% on your own. This kind of race is becoming a lot more common. There's a similar race that's on the Colorado Trail, the Arizona Trail. And this last year we saw one in the Bighorns Mountains in Wyoming. Somebody's doing an unsupported race in crossing South Dakota. So there's a number of these now, but the whole idea is that you are on your own, and there's no purse. It's bragging rights only.
So is there an official start?
Well, they have, the individual time trial, the ITT, okay? But there's usually a grand depart for any one of these races. So in the case of the Tour Divide, it's the second Friday of June every year.
you've been to that Grand Depart before?
Yeah.
What's that experience like?
It's electric. Everybody's just absolutely wound up. And of course, there's this guy up there named Crazy Larry. He tries to herd everybody and get pictures of them and everything. And he's the one that times when everybody leaves. Everybody's just jumpy. So they're all riding out of town at the 22 miles an hour. Which is not the right speed to be riding out of town when you're on something like that, because you're just going to blow everything off in the first 10 miles. You really do have to climb out of town. But anyway, that's kind of organized by Crazy Larry as best I can sort out. He does it on a volunteer basis also as best I can sort out. But it's become kind of a thing. So the YMCA hotel in Banff is where that starts from. And so if you go online and look at Banff Tour Divide Grand Depart, you're going to see the YMCA hotel.
So then, if this is an unsupported race, I mean, are you, like in traditional races, you'd be issued a number, and then if you dropped out, you'd have to call in, and do you still have to do that sort of thing?
There's no number, and there is a call-in number, but it's MTB Cast. There's a guy that has this app. You put it on your phone, you get a sticker with the phone number. I've got it in my wallet here, and it's basically MTB Cast. So he runs this call-in feature for all kinds of mountain bike unsupported races worldwide. And so if you have the app, you'll see all these entries that people have made on their daily phone calls, and there's no requirement for you to call at any particular time or anything like that. You just do it whenever you can, whenever you feel like it. So it's loosely organized is probably a good way to put it.
I'm just trying to figure out in my mind, like for the people that are, going to finish first or second or whatever, how do they know, their exact starting times, and how is it kind of official that this is what their times are?
That's all through the track leader page. To get in the track leader page, you've basically got to get your spot locator registered. Then it's all just handled by that website. So the website itself automatically tracks your location, what your average speed was, how far you've gone, what mile you're on, that sort of thing. If you've scratched or you finished, it just tracks the whole thing. So I'm not privy to the inner workings of how that website works, but that's been my experience with it.
So for your navigation, you are relying on your GPS, or is the trail marked in any way?
The trail isn't marked, but the Adventure Cycle Association, which is I think they're in Missoula, Montana, they set up or designed the Tour Divide mountain bike route back in the late 90s and published maps on it. So I think there's 7 maps. And the first one is the Canadian section. Then the second one goes through Montana to Polaris. Then the third one is from Polaris to somewhere in Wyoming, and so on. So when I first did it, I did most of my navigation by the map, and I used the GPS to keep track of my miles. So when I reached certain mile points, I'd be knowing to be looking for a turn. It was before I really understood how to use the GPS, because it seemed like it was tricky to use and a little fidgety. Since then, I've learned how to use it better. And so last time I went on a bikepacking trip, I was able to rely entirely on the GPS and only use the map for occasional reference stuff.
How much hike a bike do you plan on having to do?
A lot. Give you an idea. There's this rather infamous section in Canada that's known as the Wall. You literally have to push your bike up a hill that's about 150 feet high, maybe 200. I'm not sure, but it's steep. It's just about vertical. So you have to claw your way up that. Then you're ascending the Galton Pass, and I found most of the Galton Pass to be unrideable. It was just too darn steep. There would be sections where I'd get on a portion of the road where, okay, now I can ride it, and then I come around the corner, and now I have to push the bike again. So it was 5:30 when I started up, and it was 8:30 when I got to the pass. And I would say on a lot of passes, that's not uncommon. When I went up Portman's Pass in Montana, I would say that's the steepest pass of all of the ones that I've seen so far. Boy, I think I was a good 4.5 hours going through that, and a lot of it I was forced to hike because it was just too steep. I did see one guy who had one of those new Eagle SRAM 12-speed units, and he put it in the low gear, stood up on the bike, and literally rode out of sight. But he wasn't going a whole lot faster than walking. I have to say, though, as far as climbing goes, that's probably the most heroic thing I've seen on a bike yet.
What's your favorite part of the Tour Divide?
Canada is astonishing. Northern Montana is astonishing, too. The Marshall Pass in Colorado is stunning. I mean, I think my favorite thing about the Tour Divide is winding up, looking at a vista and realizing that you don't see anything man-made except the road that you're on. Really knowing that you're in the middle of nowhere and that there's no one around. It's a wonderful feeling. I don't know if other people see it that way, but that's how I see it. It's hard to say what my favorite spot is because there's so many just astonishing places. I remember when I first went across, got to the Red Meadow Lake on the Red Meadow Pass, I literally came around the corner and here was this astonishing alpine lake, and I literally broke into tears. It was so gorgeous. It was a perfect morning, and everything was perfect about it. A lot of people have had to post-hole it through there because there's been snow on that pass, but when I went through, it was perfectly dry and just wonderful. I've encountered meadows that were miles long and miles wide that are just full of wildflowers with nobody in sight, just amazing colors. So it's hard to express what that stuff is about, but getting out in that is, I would say that's something that you can do bike packing. You can probably do it in a 4-wheel drive or a motorbike too, but it's not going to be the same experience because anybody who tours a bike knows that you see so much more of the land when you're pedaling.
So besides the movies that you mentioned so far, do you have any other resources that you might recommend to people that are interested in learning more about bike packing?
Oh, there's a lot of videos on YouTube. A lot of short videos done by guys that, okay, this is my bike packing rig, and they have it packed up in front of you and they take it apart. Okay. Some of them are made by some pretty respectable names in the bike packing world. One of those guys is a pretty famous racer named Mike Hall, who unfortunately was killed last year in the Pacific Wheel Race. But there's a lot of that. One of my favorite videos, though, which really doesn't, maybe it does show you something. It's 25 minutes long. It's done by these two Italian brothers called the Alessi brothers. And they did this in 2015. They rode the Tour Divide. So it's kind of something to see how they're packed up, what kind of bikes they're on, what kind of stuff you see along the way. It gives you a real good feel for, and of course the music's great. They did a wonderful job producing that video. So I'd recommend that one if you want to see just a wonderful video about what the Tour Divide is like. That's actually a nice shot. There's a ton of videos on YouTube, and some of them are really tricky to watch. There's a guy named Josh Cato, who's one of the more respected racers. He put up a video that's just photographs, and he's a pretty good photographer. So if you can find that one, it's really, really worth watching also. And I guess I should add, there are plenty of blogs, and there's a bikepacking.net website that has all kinds of information on it. So if you start Googling this stuff, the bike packing aspect of the cycle industry is in a major explosion right now. And it's been that way for several years. I think it's one of the faster growing segments of the bicycle market. So right now it's very, very easy to find plenty of resources on this.
Do you have time for a few more questions?
Sure.
I was curious about Atma-Sphere. What is Atma-Sphere?
That is a company that I started that makes high-end audio equipment, specifically amps and preamps.
Is the market fairly strong for that type of a product?
I'm not sure how to answer that. The high-end audio industry is kind of very underground in that most people don't even know that it even exists. They think high-end audio, well, that's an expensive Yamaha or, excuse me, Pioneer amp or something. It's not like that at all. In high-end audio, there are still vacuum tubes. And there's this ongoing debate about which is better, tubes or transistors, which has been there longer than the internet. The LP is still highly respected in high-end audio. It's a serious component, and digital hasn't knocked it off of its throne yet. It's tried hard. It's done that in the mid-fi market, but in the hi-fi market, you can, well, let's put it this way, you can buy turntables like crazy. You know, Technics just reintroduced their SL1200. They're getting $4,000 for it, and that's cheap for a high-end turntable. Here in Minneapolis, one of the best tone arms made anywhere in the world is made in South Minneapolis. That's the Triplanar. If you're in Minneapolis, there's also Audio Research Corporation and Magnaplanar, two more commonly known names. So high-end audio it's a crazy thing. So yes, there's definitely a market. There are more manufacturers of vacuum tube equipment in the U.S. now than there was in 1958.
Yeah, it's amazing what people are willing to spend their money on. I heard something about like the watch industry. Just watches alone in the U.S. is like a $7 billion a year business.
Yeah, exactly. And in high-end audio, interconnect cables and speaker cables. I mean, you can demonstrate that you can hear the effects of these cables, okay? It's easy enough to do. That alone is a several $billion a year industry, just the cables.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So I don't even know what that would be for, like how many tubes are being sold or in the U.S. I'm not privy to some of those numbers, but it's a crazy market. And if you go to some of these high-end audio shows, the next big one coming up is Axpona in Chicago in mid-April. You really get a sense to feel that, yeah, there's definitely a market for this stuff.
So I'm curious about like the size of your company. I'm assuming you're the owner of it, and how many employees do you have? And
we've got 3 employees, and I've been doing it for a long time. And anyone who knows me knows that I've just been doing it because I enjoy it. I never intended to get rich with it or anything like that. But it pays the bills. I'm going to say we're medium small because I actually have employees. Okay, I have competitors that don't have employees. We're actually servicing one of their amps in our shop right now, and that amplifier is just a power amp, and it's $36,000 brand new. So, imagine this is something that costs more than a typical car, and it's just an amplifier. And the guy who makes it has been doing it for the last 40 years, and he has no employees. Crazy world, huh?
Yeah, man. Okay, hang gliding. I see that. Are you still into hang gliding?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't realize there was like is hang gliding a thing in Minnesota? Oh,
sure. Yeah, that's where I learned how to fly. I was in Minnesota, and that's where I get most of my airtime is here. Either that, or I also go out west on hang gliding expeditions. So part of the reason the Tour Divide was such an attraction to me is I've flown so much around the Continental Divide in Montana, in Colorado, and Wyoming.
So where in Minnesota do you, because you have to have like a cliff to jump off of with hang glider, right?
You know where Lake Pepin is, right? we've had a number of sites around Lake Pepin over the years. We still have one now. The land boom that happened in the 90s knocked out a good number of our sites. And there's been attrition. A lot of the pilots that learned to fly here just said, screw this, because, the weather in Minnesota is so unpredictable, and they moved out west. So there's not many of us left at this point. But one thing that did happen around year 2000 or so is they started making powered harnesses that would allow you to just take off under power. And once you get up into the thermal lift, you can shut off the engine, lock the prop, and fly around like a regular hang glider. So some of the airtime has gotten that way in this area. That's not uncommon. So you don't really need the cliff anymore, but I much prefer the foot launch. And again, the YouTube is just full of videos of people hang gliding, and there's some of them that you can see my glider if you're looking carefully.
So Lake Pepin, I think you mentioned that at the beginning. Is that down near Red Wing?
Yeah. Red Wing's at the northern and western end of the lake, and Wabasha is at the southern and eastern end of the lake. And it's surrounded by bluffs that are anywhere from 300 to 400 feet in height. Ralph,
any other cycling adventures in your future after the Tour Divide that you're going to do this summer?
Really want to do the Colorado Trail. Stuff I've seen in the Colorado Trail, and having been a lot in Colorado, flying at Telluride and stuff like that, the idea that they've got a route that goes through there is really, really attractive to me. So I want to give it a shot. So don't think I'm doing that this year, probably next year on that one. We'll see.
How long is that?
If you're racing, you can do it in 5 days, I think. It's basically from Denver down to Durango. And it winds around a lot. The Marshall Pass that is on the Tour Divide is also on the Colorado Trail. So it definitely spends a lot of time at higher elevations. So that's definitely something worth looking on YouTube as well. You'll see some pretty well-produced stuff. There's at least one movie that's about, I don't know, it's probably half an hour long. It's got a lot of drone footage in it. It's worth looking at.
Ralph, do you have any way that people can contact you if they want to ask you some questions or learn more?
Well, I suppose email Ralph at Atma-Sphere.com.
Atma-Sphere.com.
Yep. That's an easy way to get a hold of me.
Okay, Ralph Karsten, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us about your bikepacking setup, and good luck to you on this upcoming Tour Divide.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening. If you want to support the show, here are a few simple ways. Number 1, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the podcast. 2, you can like the show on Facebook or follow along on Twitter at The Pursuit Zone. 3, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. This episode was recorded on February 20th, 2018. For the show notes and more great adventure travel podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.